Quoting, sponsored by the Women's Center at Florida Junior College. I'm Pat Broderick. Our guest is Jane Brody, science and health writer for the New York Times, columnist and author. Her most recent book, Jane Brody's Guide to Personal Health, covers everything from fad diets and exercise to cancer and the common cold. Today we're going to discuss the myths and fads of nutrition that many of us have been brought up with. Welcome to the program, Jane.
Thank you, Pat.
I'd like to start out by sharing with our audience a bit of heresy for any dieter out there. Eat the potatoes, rice, pasta, corn, beans, and bread, if you can believe that. What about starch? What about carbohydrates?
You know, people say to me, these are just starch. You know, when I go on a diet, what do you pass up? You eat the steak and you eat the salad, usually with a couple of hundred calories worth of greasy dressing, and you pass the potato. You never would dream of dipping into the bread basket, and you certainly wouldn't sit down to a plate full of spaghetti, and yet that's exactly what you should be doing, because those so-called just starches are, first of all, lower in calories than the foods that we commonly eat when we're trying to get rid of some extra pounds. And they're much more healthy than just starch. They contain all kinds of vitamins and minerals and dietary fiber, which is not usually put on a list of essential nutrients, but is really essential to the proper workings of your whole digestive tract and lots of other parts of your body as well. Let me give you an example of the caloric value of these foods in comparison to America's favorite, the steak. A 5-ounce steak has 550 calories. 80% of those calories, incidentally, come from fat, not protein. A 5-ounce potato, by comparison, has only 110. And even if you put 2 pats of butter or margarine on that potato, you only come up to 180 calories. 5 ounces of spaghetti or macaroni has 210 calories. Even 5 ounces of bread, 390 calories. That's still fewer calories, far fewer, than your 5-ounce steak.
What about all the starch blockers people have piled up in their shelves?
Well, I hope you will all throw them out, all of you who have them piled up anywhere, because first of all, starch blockers block the very nutrient that we should be consuming the most of, assuming that they work, that is, which is to prevent you from digesting starch. And starch is the only major nutrient that is not associated with any chronic, serious health risk. And so it is the food, incidentally, that the human species evolved on. And we should be consuming most of our calories from starchy foods, supplemented by fruits and vegetables and small amounts of animal and vegetable protein.
We were talking about starch blockers for one. What about all these other miracle drugs you see in magazines everywhere that in 10 days you're going to have thin thighs, you're going to be skinny.
Right. 10 days you'll lose 20 pounds, right? You can't even do it if you starved. If you ate nothing, you wouldn't lose 20 pounds in 10 days. You might lose 10 pounds of water, however. And that's not what you're supposed to be losing, because water is the equivalent to the oil that you put in your automobile to keep everything operating properly. Water is the oil of our cells and our muscles and our joints. And if we dehydrate our bodies by these crazy diet schemes, either by going on a very high protein diet or by taking pills that wash water out of your body, you're impairing the functioning of every cell in your body, including the cells in your brain. So they promise you miracles, but you know why there are so many of them?
Why?
They don't work. Not a one of them works. If any one of them worked, there would be no reason for all the successors.
People spend thousands and thousands of dollars every year on the Scarsdale diet, Fritkin diet, Beverly Hills diet.
Now, you point to any city on the map and you'll find a diet.
Do they not only not work, but are they harmful as well, as you say, because they take water away?
Many of them are harmful because they distort the body's nutrient requirements. For instance, the ones that emphasize protein and fat at the expense of carbohydrate, the so-called low-carbohydrate diets that have very little starch and sugar, if any, will change the entire chemical balance of your blood and put you into a chemical state called ketosis, which if it happened to a normal person, they'd be thrown in the hospital immediately to get their blood corrected. It's brain damaging, it's kidney damaging, and it makes you feel rotten all over. You feel weak, irritable, and you know, with the starch blockers, you know what, if they work, what they do is that they cause diarrhea. By the starch that you're not digesting collects in your gut and is washed out. And along with the diarrhea, you lose essential nutrients and you distort the acid and base balance of your blood, and it could be a very dangerous situation.
You mentioned animal protein and vegetable protein. I'm sure a lot of people aren't aware what is one and what is the other than steak has one and maybe a leafy vegetable has the other. What about a vegetarian diet? Is that actually healthier?
It's interesting because we've had these very negative feelings about vegetarians. You know, they've often been thought of some kind of kooks because they have rejected a foodstuff that seems perfectly wonderful for most of us. Yeah, it's un-American. It's un-American, and okay, it's okay to be a vegetarian if it coincides with your religious beliefs, but you know, you shouldn't have any other reasons for doing it. As it happens, a properly designed vegetarian diet is healthier than any meat-eating diet. You have lower blood pressure, you have fewer heart attacks, you have fewer cancers. Your weight is usually in better control. But now, I'm not saying that everybody should be a vegetarian. I'm not a vegetarian. You do not have to give up eating meat in order to benefit from the principles of a vegetarian diet, which is basically to use the starchy foods and fruits and vegetables as the basis of your meals and eat protein in its proper proportion. And that protein can come from lean meats, from chicken and turkey without the skin, because the skin is almost entirely fat, which we don't need, from learning how to broil our fish instead of breading and frying it, or steaming things. I make poached chicken breast, for instance, very low fat, very wonderful food, and much more wholesome than fried chicken.
Jane, you made, talking about frying and poaching, that when you go in a restaurant, foods to avoid are sauté, cooked in its own juices, au gratin, and steer yourself toward, as you mentioned, poached, pickled. Now, when you think about it, though, people are used to thinking of appetizing food as sautéed, au gratin, and probably pickled as not being at all appetizing. How do you change this way of perceiving food?
Well, first of all, you change gradually. I do not think people should pick up any diet scheme, including my own, and just sweep the cupboard bare and start all over again. Revolutions don't stick. They are met with counter-revolutions, and the trick is to change your diet in an evolutionary fashion. First, you have to raise your consciousness. You have to become aware of what it is that's good for you and how to make it tasty. Because nobody wants to eat dull, uninteresting food. I love to eat, and I think eating is one of the great pleasures of life, and we should continue to enjoy it. And you will continue to enjoy it if you don't throw out everything you currently love in one fell swoop and substitute everything that I'm telling you you should eat overnight, because you will feel deprived and miserable. But instead, make the changes gradually, experiment with dishes. Try making a pasta dish with a sauce that isn't swimming in a heavy cream sauce. You don't need that. You can make a tomato sauce using 1 tablespoon of oil and lean ground meat that is first cooked so that you pour the fat off, and then you mix it with that lean tomato sauce, and you have a dinner with a salad, again with a low-fat dressing, that has fewer calories than a steak and salad dinner or even a tuna fish salad.
Let's see if any of we have a question over here.
I'm wondering, when you're talking about fad diets, what about fiber, high fiber diets? Is that a myth, or is that a good idea?
Well, it's interesting because fiber has been neglected for so many years that most of us have gone through, you know, public school and college, and into adulthood without ever even knowing what dietary fiber is. Dietary fiber happens to be a very essential part of our menu plan. I call it the roto-rooter of your digestive tract. It helps to clean out all the garbage and keep everything working smoothly like a well-oiled machine. There should be no need for artificial stimulants of your gut. There should be no need for laxatives of any kind, except in very extreme circumstances of illness when you're in the hospital or something of that sort and your diet is very restricted. Furthermore, in addition to its known benefits to the digestive tract, fiber helps to lower serum cholesterol, to lower blood sugar so that it improves the control of diabetes, and it keeps your blood sugar, even if you don't have diabetes, on a very even keel, so you don't go up and down and irritable and happy all day long. And it helps you control your weight.
But does it cure cancer, as we've heard?
Cure cancer? No.
Prevent cancer?
Help prevent cancer? Possibly. The evidence is not complete, but if you look at the patterns of cancer throughout the world and you look at the diets of people who do not have the digestive tract cancers, for example, and the breast cancers that we have in this country, you find that they eat a very high fiber diet. And the evidence in the laboratory seems to indicate that the fiber that goes down undigested into your lower digestive tract actually glomps onto cancer-causing substances and washes them out of the body rapidly.
We have another question.
When you entertain, do you splurge, or have you just completely changed your whole cooking style and your guests adapt to it?
You know, it's interesting because when I first, my diet is still in the process of evolution, and I think that that's how one should go through life, because I think being stuck in a corner is not a very happy solution. Once a year, I do something absolutely outrageous. I make something like blinis, Russian pancakes that are very filled with butter and that are served with caviar, which is full of cholesterol and salt, and chopped egg, and sour cream, all full of fat and cholesterol. And we just have this one blitz. It's my New Year's Eve dinner. And I might even do an outrageous dessert along with it. But more and more, even for company, even for dinner parties, I find myself serving a salad, a pasta dish, or a soup where everything in the meal is in that one bowl. It's so thick that you need a fork to eat it, and homemade bread, and a wonderful, beautifully designed fruit platter for dessert, probably with a few homemade cookies.
But are people terrified about the thought of inviting you out to dinner?
Well, no, actually they're not. Occasionally somebody will apologize and say, I know this isn't on your diet, but the truth is, if they do read what I write about nutrition, they will realize, people will realize that there is room for those splurges. There is room for everything in your diet that you now love, as long as it is part of an overall scheme that is properly balanced and well designed, and that you don't go overboard. You don't have the no-nos too often or in too great a quantity. But, you know, 2 cookies is not going to kill you. Neither will a slice of apple pie once in a while, or a dish of ice cream once a week even.
What about chocolate ice cream?
Chocolate is fine. I don't care
I'm
what
so
flavor.
happy to hear that. Do we have another question?
May I ask how you feel about frozen foods as to fresh?
Well, out of season, when fresh foods are hard to get, the frozen vegetables are your next best bet, because frozen vegetables are picked at their peak and preserved rapidly in a way that loses very few nutrients. But now when I talk about frozen vegetables, I'm talking about the ones that are plain vegetables, not the ones that have been gunked up with all these fancy sauces, because what you've done, let's say in creamed onions, is you've taken a very low calorie, high fiber, nutritious vegetable, and you've added 150 calories of fat to each serving. And that's not the way to eat onions.
You have mentioned the Japanese diet quite a bit, particularly in reference to their low amount of cholesterol compared to our diets. Would you say we should be emulating their diets?
I think, again, that we can look at the Oriental diet, we can look at the Middle Eastern diet, and derive lessons on how to approach our meals that are more wholesome. I don't think we have to adopt any particular diet scheme. We can suit it to our own personal taste and our American way of eating and living. But if you look at the Oriental diet or the Middle Eastern diet, you'll see that it is based on a grain. Or in the Orient, it's rice. In India, it's rice and beans, as it is in Mexico. In the Middle East, it's bulgur, which is cracked wheat, and millet, and couscous. These are the bulk of the calories in the meal, and the meat portion of the meal is very slender. There may be at the most 2 ounces of lean meat or fish or chicken per person per meal. And that is enough animal protein for anybody, except maybe someone who is starting from a 97-pound weakling and trying to look like Charles Atlas overnight.
Anybody like that out here? We have another question.
I have 2 questions. The Seventh-day Adventist diet, they're vegetarians, and I understand they take amino acids. And I'd like to supplement the fact that a vegetarian diet is weak in meat. I'd like to verify that. And the other is the snack habits of the American public. Could you illuminate on that, please?
Okay. Well, a proper vegetarian does not need to take amino acids. What you need to do is balance the vegetable sources of protein so that those that are deficient in certain essential amino acids are complemented by others that provide those. For example, by mixing the rice and the beans, you get complete protein, as high a quality protein as you would get in meat, fish, or chicken. A peanut butter sandwich is top quality protein because the peanuts combined with the grain from the bread makes a complete protein. You do not need to take supplements of any sort. The Seventh-day Adventist diet does use dairy products and eggs, and those are sources of animal protein which balance out the vegetable sources of protein absolutely perfectly.
Were vitamin supplements ever necessary?
Ever? Occasionally. For the average person, for the 40 million Americans who swallow a pill every day, they are not necessary.
Are they hazardous to health?
Certainly the megadoses of various ones can be dangerous. First of all, some of them are stored in the body and can accumulate to very harmful excess. One of them, incidentally, is iron. There's the only one way the body gets rid of iron, and that's through bleeding. And if you don't bleed, then it accumulates and can damage your kidneys and your liver and other essential organs, and there's actually people who die of too much iron stored in their bodies. If you take megadoses of any particular B vitamin, you will change your body's requirement for the other B vitamins. And so you would actually induce a deficiency, even though your diet was originally adequate in B vitamins. The one-a-day type multivitamin mineral supplement is not dangerous, except if you think of it as licensed to eat anything you darn please. Because there is no vitamin mineral supplement that supplies all 44 of the essential nutrients, nor is there any such supplement that would compensate for a high-fat, high-sugar diet that is mostly based on snack foods and not on wholesome foods. And let's answer the ladies' junk food question, because certainly the snacking in America provides, depending upon your age group, anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of the calories consumed by the average person. That's very important then to make your snack foods count for something in terms of what your body's nutritional requirements. And I don't throw out sweet snacks. I make my own, and I make sure that what's in them is something that's good for my body and for my children, like bran muffins. And I use half of the amount of sugar in a traditional recipe. And I use wheat germ, and I use bananas and raisins and other sources of sweetening that are far more nutritious than just plain sugar.
Jane, you have 2 growing sons. Now, I don't know if they started out with this sort of diet as young children or were used to it, but how did you get them, or how should other parents get their children to accept this sort of diet?
Well, number one is you don't keep the stuff that you don't want the kids to eat in the house. I constantly run into parents who say, how do I keep my kids from eating cookies all day long or drinking all that pop? I said, well, don't buy it, for starters. You will reduce the amount they consume enormously if it's not there when the children are there. And just gradually, as you would for yourself or for your spouse, introduce the foods that are good for the children and slowly take away the ones that are not. When my children heard that chicken skin was almost pure fat, and they had this vision that any fat they put in their mouth would end up on their hips, they stopped eating chicken skin overnight. I didn't have to say another word.
Probably reassuring to all you out there. We have another question.
Yes. Yeah, for persons who are experiencing depression of one kind or emotional depression, what special diet steps would you recommend?
Okay, well, there isn't any nutritional cure for depression, but it is very important for a depressed person to do everything that will help enhance his or her self-image. And one of the best things that you can do is to set yourself a nice place, like you really count, and set wholesome foods out there and take especially good care of yourself. And make sure you get some exercise. That's another ingredient of good nutrition that we neglect. Exercise, especially of the long muscles of your body, your legs, your arms, and your trunk muscles, either like swimming, walking, jogging, bicycling. That kind of activity is the best antidepressant we know about, and without any harmful side effects. And I know several psychiatrists around the country who will not accept patients for treatment for depression unless they agree to participate in an exercise program, because it makes it that much easier to get them over the hump.
We have been talking about junk food at one point, and we have just come out of this enormous hamburger war. Which one is bigger? Which one is better? If I recall, Julia Child even reviewed them and said, well, they don't taste that bad. They're not that bad. They have a lot of salt. What is your opinion?
I occasionally have lunch or snack at Burger King or McDonald's.
That's quite a confession.
Well, but you see, if you balance out your foods, you have to realize that these foods are missing certain nutrients that you need. For example, fruits and vegetables, and to a certain extent dairy products, the milk part of the diet. And if you balance out the rest of your day's meals with what's missing in your fast food lunch, then that's okay. But as long as it's not a steady diet. I mean, I would not recommend that you have that lunch every day, a hamburger with all the stuff on it lunch. And also, if you select properly from amongst the fast foods, you can do much better. Many of the fast food establishments now have salad bars where you can make up for some of those deficiencies in the hamburgers and the fries. And I, incidentally, stay away from the fries.
We have another question.
I have two questions. First, would you comment on the effect of caffeine on the body? And second, are there any preservatives that we should especially avoid in the foods that we buy?
Good. Well, there is a reason why caffeine is the national drug. Caffeine makes people feel better. It takes away the mental cobwebs. It helps your muscles work better. Typists type faster and more accurately on small amounts of caffeine. Drivers are more alert and more expert in their maneuvering of a vehicle. So there is good reason why people get hooked on this. The problem with caffeine is that some people get carried away. If a little is good, more must be better. And you can become really hooked on the lift that caffeine can give you, to the point where you actually are inducing your own anxiety attacks. And this is a very common problem in the United States. People go to doctors and get prescriptions for Valium or other tranquilizers, when in fact all they have to do is reduce their coffee or tea consumption, and they would be much better off, because the caffeine is what's making them so nervous and on edge all the time and irritable.
What about at the opposite end of the spectrum, alcohol?
Well, see, everything in life that you think is so good is not immoral, illegal, fattening, and unhealthy besides.
What a relief.
A small amount of alcohol, as long as you're not an alcohol addict or a pregnant woman. For you folks please, don't go home and start drinking because Jane Brody says alcohol is good for you. But a small amount of alcohol, 1 or 2 drinks a day, happens to be associated with a longer life expectancy and fewer heart attacks than being a teetotaler. So,
Do we have another question out there?
got the other half of the question.
In regard to children, would you comment on such things as the Feingold diet, which link hyperactivity and sugar?
It linked hyperactivity with food additives and food colorings. And there apparently are a few children, a small percentage of hyperactive children, who seem to have a supersensitivity to certain things put in foods. And for these children, it's like an allergic reaction. It's like a brain allergy in a sense. But nowhere near the 50% of hyperactive children that Dr. Feingold claimed. Study after study that was properly designed, that means it was controlled so that neither the child, nor the parent, nor the observer knew who was getting which diet, has shown anything like the claims that Feingold has made for that diet. Probably what is happening, because there's certainly a lot of anecdotal reports from parents saying that their child who was previously so off the wall is now reasonably manageable. What is happening is that the child has become the focus of positive attention instead of negative attention. And that the whole family's energies, instead of chastising the child every time he broke something or jumped on something or disrupted the classroom, is now focused on eating well, and everybody is in it together, and we're all trying to help you, Johnny. Well, any child will respond positively to that kind of attention.
That lady had a part 2 of the question, and I didn't give you a chance to answer it. Would you like to?
Yeah, I've forgotten what it was, though. Preservatives. The preservatives that we should be watching out for are in the very foods you shouldn't be eating in the first place. The processed meats, which are loaded with nitrates and nitrites, and they can form into a very potent cancer-causing substance in the body called nitrosamine. But also the foods that their nitrates and nitrites are in are 85% fat calories and full of salt besides. So they've got 3 strikes against them. So I would go way, way down on the bolognas and the salamis and the hot dogs and the smoked sausages and all of those kinds of fatty, salty, nitrate and nitrite-laden processed meats.
Health food stores are everywhere, though. We keep hearing about organic, natural.
Would you believe everything you eat is organic? It wouldn't be. Organic is a meaningless word, and so is natural. There is no definition for it. I have done whole articles on natural and gone into the supermarket and read from the label as to what was natural. There's one product, artificial orange drink, that says natural orange flavor. Well, the only thing natural in that stuff is the water that you add when you mix the powder in your kitchen.
Jane Brody, I wish we had hours more to discuss this. It has been fascinating. I want to thank you, our studio audience, and all our viewers at home. Thank you for being with us, and please stay healthy.